Hello, welcome to Kathaayaana. This is Trotting, where every week I take you to different countries around the world and share stories from those lands. And the countries chosen will be in alphabetic order A to Z. The story that I'm going to share with you today comes from a country beginning with the letter G, and that is Greece. Greece is the birthplace of the world famous Olympic Games. And yes, I'm going to share with you today the story of the origin and all about the ancient Olympic Games. Olympic Games is said to have begun in Greece during the 776 BC. Though the exact reason or the exact story behind the birth of Olympic Games is not known, there are a few stories. One of the references goes to mythology, where it is believed that the hero Hercules had first staged Olympic Games at Olympia in honor of his father, the king of gods, Zeus, who was residing at Mount Olympus. It seems that god Zeus had helped his son Hercules to conquer a place called Elis. And so, as a means of giving a thank you to his father, Hercules had established the Olympic Games. But historically, there is a more profound cultural and religious reason as to how the Olympic Games began. During ancient times, Greece was not a single state, but it was a series of city-states who were politically and economically independent. They were all split across and they were constantly at war with each other. So it is believed that Olympic Games was created in order to bring all the Greek world together. And also the Greek community in ancient times was a highly geographically dispersed community. Greek people were living in lands which are now known as France, Italy, Spain, Turkey, and even Russia. So the question that was worrying the Greeks a lot was, what is it that makes us all Greek? And so Olympic Games was one strong reason for them to reassert their identity. They believed that playing sports, participating, and even attending the Olympic Games would inspire, give them that inspiration of shared feeling of belonging to the same culture or same religion. And so the Greek people from all over the Mediterranean basin would flock to participate or attend at the Olympic Games that was held every 4 years there in Greece. The wars that were happening between the city-states used to be called off during the Olympic Games so that the participants, the spectators, could safely travel to and fro from the game sites. Full of blood, passion, and extraordinary feats of athletic endeavor, Olympic Games was a sporting, cultural, and social highlight in ancient Greece that went on for almost 12 centuries. At the heart of it, Olympic Games was a religious festival held at a religious sanctuary called Olympia. It is here where the ancient Olympic Games were held. Olympia. Olympia was not a town or city, but rather a sanctuary. It contained a sacred area where there were temples dedicated to many gods, including one to the king of gods, Zeus. Then there were altars on which sacrifices were made, and then there were treasuries, small buildings erected by city-states in which precious offerings were made. Outside the sacred area was the secular area, which contained the training areas and competition sites like the stadium. And there were also buildings used for administrative purposes of the games. The stadium was not oval as we know it today, but it was rectangular. It had a packed earth floor and its boundaries were marked by grassy slopes on which the spectators sat. There was one running track. There have been many renovations made to the stadium over the years, but the length of the track in the stadium remained constant. It always measured 600 feet by 192 meters, because it was believed that this was the distance the hero Hercules could run on a single breath. So who were the people participating and attending in the Olympic Games, the ancient Olympic Games? Any man of Greek origin and who was a free man could participate. Women, slaves and foreigners were excluded. The contestants ranged from kings, shepherds, philosophers, any common man, any aristocrat was welcome. But as time went on and the popularity of the games increased, professional athletes and members of the military began to participate in the games more and more. And the participants trained individually over several months before the games, and during their training period they were on a very simple traditional diet made of olives, bread, feta cheese and a reasonable amount of meat. During their training sessions, the participants stripped completely, because one of the main criteria of participating in the games was that the contestant had to participate naked. These participants would cover their body in olive oil and sand so that their body temperature is regulated and their skin is protected from the sun. And after their rigorous training session, they would scrape off the sweat, oil and dust from their body and take bath. And so, after a long, strict training regime, the participants would all move to a town called Elis, very close to Olympia, 1 month before the Olympic Games, where a final selection would take place in order to determine who would finally go to Olympia to play the final Olympic Games. The spectators, as we know, came from all over the Mediterranean basin. It has been estimated that during the ancient Olympic Games, the number of spectators ranged anywhere between 40,000 to 50,000 people. In addition to the athletes, the participants and the spectators, there were a number of merchants of all kinds who would flock to the Olympic Games site. Painters, artists, orators of all kinds would come there to Olympia, the game site, and put up their artwork, put up their small stalls of their work, give speeches, give lectures, thus displaying to people their work. It was a week of total chaos, with anyone who wanted to raise their profile would come because they knew this is the time and the place to do. It used to be a bustling bazaar with family, friends and associates drinking, eating, gossiping and doing business together. It used to be a grand show. Initially, the ancient Olympic Games began with only one day event, with the only event being foot race or the running race. Then almost a century later, the Olympic Games were extended to over 3 days. Then in 5th century BC, the Olympic Games were again extended to cover 5 days. And the events included equestrian events, running events, a special type of primitive martial art form called Pangrathion, and the pentathlon events, which were a long jump, discus throw, javelin throw, wrestling and boxing. These games consisted only of individual sports. There were no team sports. This is how the ancient Olympic Games looked day-wise. Day 1, it was the oath-taking day, where the athletes and the judges would all file into the temple of Zeus in the sacred area. Then, standing at the terrifying statue of Zeus, they would all swear over a slice of boar's flesh that they will all obey the rules of the games. They will take part in the competitions in an honorable way by abiding to all the rules and use no unfair means to gain victory. On day 2, equestrian events took place. The most popular event was the 4-horse chariot race. It was the most aristocratic event where the royalty would take part the most. It was also very prestigious and violent. Now, this chariot race took place in a specially constructed competition site called the hippodrome. The charioteers would perch on a wooden wheeled open back chariot that rested on its own back axle. They would all funnel into the entrance of the hippodrome. When a trumpet would blow, from a pointed front part of the track, an eagle would rise, signaling the charioteers to begin to cruise. Now, controlling 4 powerful horses with a whip while cornering at full speed and attempting to evade a host of rivals out to get you was no mean feat. It was very dangerous, with crashes between chariots and chariots veering off the course and into the audience. They would go 12 laps around the stadium. The tight corners were the most dangerous part. There were usually 40 chariots in the race. In one race, with 21 chariots starting, only one finished. And after all this life-risking effort, the winners were not the charioteers, but rather the owners of the horses. In the afternoon of day 2, 3 of the 5 pentathlon events took place. They were these: the discus throw. This was carried out without a run-up, and all the athletes used the same discus. The discus was originally made of stone and later made of iron, lead or bronze. The discus weighed anywhere between 1.3 to 6.6 kilogram with a diameter of 17 to 32 centimeter. The technique was very similar to today's freestyle discus throw. This discus throw has a tradition in Greek mythology that Apollo and Perseus accidentally killed their loved ones by blowing and striking discus on them. The long jump. The athletes would stand at the top of a reduced runway holding a large stone or lead weight called halteres in each hand to increase the distance of a jump. These halteres were of various shapes and also varied in weight from 1.4 to 2 kilograms. When the athletes began to run, forward momentum was first achieved through a short, powerful run-up during which they swung the weights back and forth. At the takeoff point, the competitors would thrust the halteres back vigorously before stretching their arms back out in front to meet their feet. At the apex of the jump, the arms would be flung backwards again using the halteres as counter thrusts. Finally, just before they hit the earth, the athletes would discard the halteres to ensure their hard-earned momentum was maintained. This event was probably made up of 5 consecutive standing jumps, which required harmony of movement and a sense of rhythm. And to help with this rhythm, a flute player was often present. Javelin throw. The athletes had a shaft which was called the javelin, to the center of which they placed a small leather strap in a loop which allowed them to give the javelin an extra rotation. Latching 2 fingers into the loop, competitors would send the javelin skyward. Day 3. This day was considered to be the culminating point of the games. A great sacrifice took place. 100 cows were killed in honor of Zeus and other gods. Their meat was shared amongst the community of games participants during a feast to which all were invited. Day 4. In the morning of day 4, the running races took place, and that took place in the stadium. The stadium race covered one length of the stadium, that is roughly 192 meters. There were several types of race. Double distance race to run around the stadium in 2 laps. Long distance race to run around the stadium in 7 to 24 laps. This running race was held in arms. The athletes wore a helmet and greaves and carried a shield. The competitors took their place on a starting line marked out by white limestone slabs. A barrier was lowered to signal the start of the race. The runners ran in a straight line, and the sacred olive tree of Zeus was the finishing line for all. The afternoon of day 4 was dedicated to combat sports. They were these: boxing. Unlike today's boxing events, the ancient Greek Olympics, in boxing category, there were no points, there were no time limits, and no weight classifications. Boxers wrapped hard leather straps around their hands to strengthen their wrists and steady their fingers. And to start the competition, lots were drawn to see who would go first. Since there was no time limit, to signal the end of a fight, one of the contestants could raise a finger. However, if two fighters could not be separated, they were offered a climax, a system whereby first one fighter and then the other was allowed a free shot at his opponent. Wrestling. Naked and covered in oil, combatants would contest in a sandy pit where one wrestler was required to throw the other to the ground 3 times. Wrestlers fought standing up with bare hands. There were different types of hold. The first person who touched the ground 3 times was the loser. Defeat could also be signaled by the raising of a hand with 1 or 2 fingers extended. Pangrathion. This was a primitive form of martial art combining wrestling and boxing. It has its roots in Greek mythology, where there was a mythical hero called Theseus who was responsible for inventing the rules of Pangrathion. He came up with a combination of wrestling and boxing to defeat the Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull demon. In ancient Greek Olympics, Pangrathion was a magnificently simple sport. One could do pretty much anything he could possibly imagine in order to incapacitate his opponent. All moves were allowed. There were no rules except for biting, gouging out eyes, and putting fingers in the opponent's nose. Unlike boxing, hands were left bare in Pangrathion. Typically, tall men favored punching as their go-to tool, while the short competitor was likely to wrestle. Both types sought the key move, a stranglehold with one arm, leaving the other free to repeatedly punch the unfortunate opponent. Pangrathiasts had the liberty to build their own fighting style. They would use short hooking blows and a technique known as ladder trick, where one wrestler would climb on to his opponent's back, lock legs tightly around his body, and strangle him behind. Day 5 and the last day. This day was reserved for honoring victorious athletes. There was only one winner across all the events whose prize was a wreath or crown of olive leaves from the holy olive tree of Zeus. The winner also received a red woolen ribbon and a pot of olive oil. Finally, the winner would hold up a palm frond as a sign of his victory. Finally, a banquet was given for them together with the politicians and judges. Although these winners did not receive any financial rewards, Olympic champions became important figures in their respective towns or respective cities. These champions would receive a hero's welcome where they would be bestowed on numerous benefits which would suffice for the rest of their lives. After the Roman Empire conquered Greece in 393 AD, Emperor Theosaudius I, a Christian, called for a ban of all pagan festivals, thus ending the pompous, the grand, ancient Olympic Games that existed for almost 12 centuries. Then, 1,500 years later, the Olympic Games were revived, and in 1896, the first modern Olympic Games were held at Athens, Greece. Hope you liked this story. If you liked it, do give us a thumbs up, share your thoughts with us, and share this video with your family and friends. This is Lakshmi taking your leave. I will see you next week with a story from a country beginning with the letter H.